webinar on cloud systems, hidden impact on IT support organizations. We'll be uploading a copy of the presentation to SlideShare as well as YouTube tomorrow morning. All participants will be sent a follow-up email that includes a link that will allow you to download a copy. This month we're going to discuss cloud environments and their impact on IT support. We'll find that these cloud offerings are architectures, not just products. And like all new architectures, they will require you to modify your administrative processes, in-house tool sets, support documentation, and possibly your org chart to support. The changes will range the spectrum, and no two shops will be affected the same way. By default, GoToWebinar mutes all participants except the speaker, which is a good thing because it reduces the chance of background noise affecting the presentation. We're going to hold questions until the end. There's a button on the GoToWebinar panel that will allow you to type your questions in. Kelly, who's the webinar's organizer, will bundle them up and we'll discuss them at the end. We want to be respectful of your time. We know that many of you will have meetings right after this one. I've timed the presentation to allow a Q&A at the end. It runs for about 40 to 45 minutes. If we're in danger of running over, I can respond to remaining questions by email. Our intent is to have these RDX Insights presentations monthly. In August, we're going to have a customer-only presentation to unveil a new enhancement to our support architecture. In September, we're going to focus on PCI DSS compliance. PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. RDX has maintained a PCI attestation for 6 years now. This is going to be a joint presentation with our auditing firm, Megaplan IT. Megaplan IT is a PCI qualified security assessor and has an excellent reputation for being thorough. We'll talk about the benefits of becoming PCI compliant and, more importantly, why the PCI DSS framework of controls applies to general data security, not just storing and processing credit cards. You can apply the PCI framework to your shop regardless if you store or process credit card swipe information. The policies are broad and all-encompassing, so they can really be used by any organization to improve the security of their computing environment. In addition, you can begin by using the framework as a set of internal standards to self-audit. The listing of PCI controls are readily available for free on the PCI organization's website. You can use them as a starting point to build your security best practices. If you want to adhere to them more strictly, you can then move forward by engaging third-party auditors to review your control procedures. It's well worth the time and expense because it allows you to rest a bit easier knowing that you have an independent auditing firm certified in a very stringent set of controls evaluating the security of your environment. I also distribute a monthly newsletter that you might be interested in. It covers a wide array of tech topics that we think would benefit readers both personally and professionally. You don't have to be a customer to receive it. This month's newsletter includes a link to an RDX video presentation on the rising interest in open source database products, articles on Microsoft Azure analysis services, several very good comparisons of cloud provider features and pricing, and an article comparing NoSQL to relational database products. Each newsletter also has a helpful hint on how to maximize your relationship with RDX. If you'd like to be added to the distribution list, let me know. I'll display my email on the last slide of the presentation. You can always add me as your LinkedIn buddy. I write articles and SlideShare presentations on a lot of different wide-ranging technical topics. I just published one this morning on Microsoft's Cosmos DB. It's a multi-model database product that supports 5 different NoSQL database models, all with one product. So it's pretty interesting. So let's get started with today's presentation. I'm not showing this slide as a cheap advertisement for our services. What I'm attempting to show is that RDX has experience monitoring and administering a wide range of on-premises and cloud database architectures. We support thousands of non-premises DB systems. In addition, we also support a wide array of IaaS and DBPaaS environments. One of the benefits that we can provide to all shops is our wide range of expertise. It's just the nature of our business. We support close to 500 customers and a little under 10,000 servers. So we're not constrained by any one organization's tech stack. We're required to administer virtually every database feature you can think of for every product we support, and we work with dozens and dozens of different tech stack combinations. We also have to be database agnostic. We'll let you know the strengths and weaknesses are for all the products we support. We're also willing to tell you which ones are the most appropriate for a given use case, but we don't have a preference towards any database vendor. Each database ecosystem, Microsoft Windows, Oracle Linux, IBM, Relational, NoSQL, Cloud, on-premises, they all have benefits and weaknesses. Because we support virtually everything, we know what works and what doesn't. There's a lot of cloud options to choose from. Here's a couple of quick database platform as a service, DBPaaS examples. There are also hundreds of IaaS providers to choose from. We're going to talk about DBPaaS versus IaaS in a couple of slides. DBPaaS and IaaS are different architectures, and we'll learn that DBPaaS is going to have a much more significant impact on your IT support procedures and documentation. The open source DB vendors are aggressively moving into the cloud. ClearDB has an interesting model. The vendor allows you to implement your MySQL database on Amazon, Google, IBM, and Microsoft's cloud IaaS environments using the exact same interface. The vendor then leverages the inherent features provided by that cloud architecture. Relevant SQL provides the same type of offering for PostgreSQL. MongoDB released a cloud database service in 2016. Amazon released Aurora. It's its own version of a MySQL and now a PostgreSQL compatible database. The key word there is compatible. We'll talk about the varying degrees of on-premises versus cloud DB compatibility in a few slides. Amazon RDS offers cloud database services for PostgreSQL, Oracle MySQL, MariaDB, the Oracle database, and SQL Server. DynamoDB is Amazon's NoSQL database. IBM's cloud product is based on CouchDB, a document-style NoSQL database that's a competitor of MongoDB. Azure, as most of us know, is SQL Server in the cloud. Google also offers Cloud SQL, which is another MySQL PostgreSQL compatible offering. Here's what RDX has learned in the last few years supporting cloud database management systems. They're certainly increasing in popularity. As they do, the requests for our services are also increasing. Cloud environments are architectures, not just database products. Depending on the vendor you choose, the complexity of these architectures and the way you administer them can range from very simple IaaS platforms to extremely complex multi-cloud DBPaaS environments. The intent of this presentation is to discuss how these architectures will change the way you provide support. We'll also learn that some databases are more cloudy or more cloud-friendly than others. Let's continue our discussion by learning more about the two primary cloud architectures, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, and Platform as a Service, PaaS. Since we're talking about database management systems, let's use the term Database Platform as a Service, or DBPaaS, to define that architecture. We all have experience with on-premises systems. We have to build the server rooms, provide heating, cooling, redundant connectivity, and power. We're required to purchase, install, and administer all the mechanisms to provide the safest environment we can for our systems. We're then required to buy the server hardware, install, and maintain it. When it breaks, or we want to increase horsepower, we have to crack the chassis and work on the server components. We add CPU, memory, disk, whatever we need. When we perform these activities, we either have to take an outage or make plans to shift the system and workloads to another server to ensure availability. We also buy and administer the OS and DB software we need to run our database-driven applications. In addition, we evaluate, buy, install, and support all the other database products we need. Monitoring, security, auditing, third-party reporting products. Look at the two stars in the lower left of this screen. We have to buy and support everything, both hardware and software. Let's move into the cloud. Most IaaS and DBPaaS environments are multi-tenant, which means we're sharing the vendor's compute and storage architecture with other customers. In addition, depending on the architecture and vendor chosen, the system will vary in degrees of scalability, elasticity, and administrative self-service. The architecture that is closest to on-premises is infrastructure as a service. That's the architecture defined in the middle bottom of this slide. With infrastructure as a service, the vendor provides the compute and storage infrastructure components and may offer some level of system maintenance activities. You have direct access to the server and storage, much like your on-premises systems, but you're able to leverage a higher level of elasticity. Think of it as a server, more often than not, a virtual server in the cloud. You don't have to build your server support environment that provides air conditioning, light, multiple power providers, UPS systems, generators, redundant connections to the internet. All that's provided by the vendor. But you'll continue to maintain ownership of your software stack's administration, including the operating system and database. You install and administer your software of choice on that platform. It's important to note that depending on the IaaS provider and the offering you've chosen, customers are able to take advantage of some of the vendor's features to reduce the time to support the environment. Microsoft Azure, for example, provides you with builds, which you can use to get a jump start on provisioning a new DB environment. But you then need to tailor that generic build to meet your needs. There are dozens and dozens of different IaaS providers. For example, RDX uses Expedient. They're a nationally known IaaS provider. They get external power from multiple utilities, have banks of UPS systems, twin diesel generators, redundant air conditioner, advanced fire suppression, and they use 4 different providers to connect to the internet. We're also set up for geographic server redundancy. If Pittsburgh goes out, our workloads can be automatically transferred to their designated failover data center. Now we know that IaaS is pretty much a server in the cloud. Let's move on to PaaS, or in our case, DBPaaS, Database Platform as a Service. DBPaaS vendors provide all the server environmental benefits that their IaaS counterparts do. But Database Platform as a Service significantly raises provider control over the customer's environment. DBPaaS providers assume ownership of the operating system and database software as well as the hardware. DBPaaS customers provide little to no operating system and database software administration. During my early analysis, I counted 29 different DBPaaS offerings that are currently available. The DBPaaS vendors also make modifications, and this is important, to their database software, primarily for 2 reasons. Number 1 is to ensure their product will work in their shared environment, and 2, to leverage the benefits that the cloud and their architecture inherently provides. Geographic data redundancy would be an example. It allows customers to leverage the cloud to very easily create DR and HA systems. It's important to note that as we discuss IaaS and DBPaaS architectures, there can be a lot of variations in the vendor offerings. IaaS allows you to maintain tighter administrative control over your environment. You can more easily leverage your favorite internal third-party products on IaaS than you can with DBPaaS. Many of the third-party tools, monitoring, security, application development, auditing, can be challenging to integrate into a DBPaaS architecture, mainly because of the modifications the vendors made to those systems. All the DBPaaS vendors provide monitoring tools. Some vendors like Amazon charge you extra if you want a more robust monitoring solution than what is offered by their base package. In general, their monitoring tools aren't as robust as the on-premises counterparts. If your DBPaaS provider determines that its own internal underlying software, the OS or database, needs a critical availability, security, or performance patch, you may not have a choice on its implementation. If that patch requires an outage, you're going to need to schedule that outage, most often before a certain date. DBPaaS offerings allow you to more easily configure complex architectures, high availability, disaster recovery. Most of the major DBPaaS providers offer geo-data redundancy. You also need to remember that since you're renting the DB and OS software, when that relationship is over, you don't own anything. The database vendors highly modify their DBPaaS environments to provide multi-tenancy, as well as leverage the inherent benefits provided by the cloud, geo-data redundancy, replication, push-button scalability. Because DBPaaS is administered much more differently than on-premises, it's going to have a greater impact on support than IaaS, which we learned is really just a server in the cloud. In an earlier slide, I stated that cloud environments are administered, of course, differently than on-premises systems. A mistake that some shops make is assuming that DBPaaS vendors provide all the DBA functions for you. That would be incorrect. Migrating to a DBPaaS environment does reduce the amount of time a DBA spends administering the database environment, but it doesn't reduce that administrative time to zero. You will experience the most significant time savings in OS administration and hardware support. DBAs do spend the time installing, patching, upgrading the DBMS software, as well as setting up and monitoring maintenance, backup utilities. Many of those administrative tasks can be provided by the DBPaaS vendor, depending on the vendor and offering selected. But the majority of our time is spent working within the database systems themselves. We build schemas, grant security, assist developers with SQL and procedural program tuning. We provide advice, enforce business logic using database features, tune the database, debug issues. DBPaaS vendors don't provide those services as part of their base package. It's important to remember that although the vendor may provide the mechanisms and processes to perform certain administrative and maintenance activities, this doesn't reduce your support responsibilities for them to zero either. Personnel may need to configure how they're to be performed, when they're scheduled. All the vendors provide patching, maintenance utilities, backup processes, but it's up to the customer to configure and schedule them and then monitor their execution. The challenge is that all these offerings provide different computing architectures. Cloud compute, memory, disk storage mechanisms. Your staff is going to need to learn how to use them. We'll go into some of these a little more deeply during the course of this discussion. Not only are the cloud DB architectures different from on-premises systems, depending on what offerings you're comparing, they can be dramatically different from each other. From provisioning or building the system to the monitoring and administration of mature systems, the changes can be extensive. We'll be doing a deep dive into some of these challenges in upcoming slides. In our last slide, we were focusing on the technological differences. Here's a list of the business process changes that may occur when you move a database up into the cloud. We'll also be discussing most of these issues that vary in impact and importance in upcoming slides. Organizations that are evaluating cloud architectures need to include the training and documentation changes that will be required by the different architectures and vendors. One of the critical evaluation criteria that shops should use to compare DBPaaS to IaaS, as well as the different vendor offerings, is how big of an impact will that cloud architecture have on the way my shop provides support. Then you need to identify what level of change you're comfortable with. The amount of impact I'm describing is entirely dependent upon the cloud architecture you've selected. Let me provide you with a quick example. Amazon's RDS, Amazon Aurora, Google SQL, MariaDB, and Oracle all have versions of MySQL, and they're all different architectures. Compute, storage, administration, backup recovery, availability configurations, SQL language constructs, and DR are all supported differently. RDX's recommendation is to thoroughly evaluate the competing architectures, not just products. One of the steps in the evaluation process should be to identify the level of change your shop is comfortable with in specific areas. The example I'm showing is RDS versus EC2. EC2 is a traditional infrastructure as a service offering. It's from Amazon. RDS is Amazon's database platform as a service. The cells in blue are the administrative activities that Amazon provides, while the cells in dark gray are the activities the customer is required to perform. You can see that Amazon has a higher level of ownership of your environment on RDS than EC2. It's important to remember that although Amazon and other cloud vendors may provide the automated mechanisms and utilities to perform these activities, as I said, it doesn't reduce your support responsibilities for them to zero. Personnel may need to configure how they're to be performed, when they're scheduled, set up notifications, and then monitor their execution. The amount of change will vary greatly depending on your environment, your required support procedures, security processes, change management documentation, as well as the amount of administration you want to continue to perform in-house versus turn over to the vendor. Security is the #1 concern when shops are considering cloud implementations. We're all aware that we need to tightly secure the database. It's pretty much a given. Not only do you need to secure and audit the databases themselves, a lot of shops seem to forget about the other objects that also need secured and audited. That includes input and output files, database load files, report files, work files. Your shop's going to be transferring data to and from a cloud system. These files will now be stored even temporarily off premises, and your security teams will need to put the appropriate policies and procedures in place to protect and audit their usage. In addition, you'll be using a cloud architecture, an architecture that will be secured differently than on-premises as well as other cloud environments. Your security team may be using different commands, tools, and interfaces. Evaluating initial and ongoing costs is critical. You're not going to be purchasing your environment, you're going to be renting it. Those rental fees can vary pretty dramatically. You can search the web and find numerous cases of shops that didn't do their due diligence and created cloud architectures, especially on Amazon, and were surprised at the charges they were incurring. Each offering has different ways of charging the customer. There are numerous articles that provide best practices on what you can do to reduce ongoing costs. The next slide shows just a couple of examples of cost calculators. Most vendors offer these calculators to help customers estimate initial setup and ongoing support costs. Here's 3 examples from Amazon, Oracle, and Microsoft. Amazon's is the most robust, but it's also the most complicated. On the left side of the Amazon provisioning pane, it lists all the different configuration wizards. There's about 120 of them. The vendor provides calculators for both IaaS and DBPaaS architectures. This is where we get into the rocket science description I showed in an earlier slide. For the sake of time, I'm not singling out any particular vendor in this presentation. Let's just take a look at Microsoft Azure as an example. Azure uses the concept of database transaction units, or DTUs, to measure resource consumption, and that's how you're charged. It's a blending of CPU, memory, data I/O, and transaction log I/O. A DTU is for a single Azure database, while eDTUs are the same unit of measure, only for an elastic database pool, which can consist of multiple databases. Since none of us have a lot of experience combining these resource consumption measurements together, the only way we'll truly estimate our cost is to run a representative workload on that DBPaaS architecture. The Azure SQL database is purchased and provisioned using standard premium and premium RS service tiers. You get so many DTUs allocated to your single SQL database, or so many eDTUs allocated to your elastic pool of databases. Not only do the tiers govern the DTUs and eDTUs, they also provide limits on the maximum database size, max concurrent logins, and max concurrent sessions. Once you hit your limit, Azure is going to begin reducing your resource utilization. It may cause some of the work in your system to queue or possibly fail. I'm only using Azure as an example. Amazon and Oracle, they're also both complex. Many cloud vendors provide advisors that scan your environments, apply a set of best practices, and generate recommendations. RDX recommends that you leverage the advisors throughout the cloud deployment, development, and mature system lifecycle. One of the biggest challenges shops will face in their cloud environments is that the costs will exceed what they expected and budgeted. The critical factor here is that you'll be renting an environment, and those rental fees are also based on consumption. So you'll need to constantly monitor your usage. If you don't, you may end up with a budgetary surprise or two. There are a lot of different architectures and tiers and options you can choose from. The vendor and architecture and the tier you select, as well as how you configure them, will impact your monthly fees. Of course, our recommendation is to do the background work to fully understand them, choose the settings that best fit for your environment that you want to build. Then monitor your fees regularly and adjust your settings as necessary. Here's an example of Amazon's administrative panels. Top left is the Oracle database configuration screen. On the top right is the design panel for high availability. In this case, a primary Oracle database with a secondary standby environment that uses Oracle log shipping as the transfer mechanism. Amazon offers over 90 different services. In the middle screenshot, Amazon also provides a graphic configuration utility with templates to help you build entire applications. The utility is called Amazon CloudFormation. They allow you to choose between YAML and JSON as the language to configure the options. You use the graphic designer to build the environments, and you can view the code at the bottom. If you choose to use the graphic configuration utility, the code that it produces as output is YAML. Because the environment is different than on-premises systems, you're going to have to update your change management processes and documentation. How long that takes and the number of techs you're going to have to dedicate to that project depends on, once again, the architecture you choose and how stringent your change management processes and documentation requirements are. Because DBPaaS is administered much more differently than on-premises, it's going to have a greater impact than IaaS, which we learned is just a server in the cloud. Depending on your overall cloud goals, size of your organization, you will need to consider the creation of new strategies and standards. I've included a laundry list of both on this slide. Since the cloud is a new architecture, it's going to affect all areas of IT and also impact how technology supports business operations. These aren't all simple decisions, and they will ultimately determine the success of your overall cloud strategy. Cloud strategies will have a very high visibility with executive management in any shop. The challenge is that the cloud is growing at such a rapid pace. New architectures, new vendors, new products, and new features are being unveiled almost on a daily basis. The market landscape no longer consists of a handful of traditional on-premises relational database offerings. The market's exploded with dozens of new alternatives from organizations that range the spectrum in price points, architectures, storage models, and feature sets. The seemingly endless array of alternatives can easily become bewildering. The amount of documentation changes required will depend upon the breadth and depth of documentation your particular organization requires as a best practice. Larger shops traditionally have more documentation and more procedures in place than smaller organizations. In addition, organizations that are governed by internal, industry, or governmental regulatory requirements are required to have more documentation and standardized administrative procedures. Your staff will need to be trained to learn the new architectures. You'll have to commit resources and then provide them with the time required to learn the new architecture. Provisioning, administration, tuning, securing, monitoring, backup recovery, disaster recovery, they're all different. It's the same basic principles of good database administration that apply to all database environments. But depending on the environment you choose, your administrators may be using different tools, utilities, and commands to perform those support operations. As an example, Amazon's been offering administrative certifications for some time now. Oracle certifications now include Cloud Service Operation, Cloud Administrator Associate, and Cloud Professional. Microsoft OS certifications now differentiate between public and private cloud implementations. You'll need to identify all the build, administration, monitoring, and access tools that your shop uses to interact with your on-premises databases. All shops usually have a couple of must-have products that are frequently used. The popularity of the cloud is driving most software vendors to make sure their offerings work with cloud systems, but you're going to need to double-check. Our recommendation is to create a list and verify that those tools will continue to work with the cloud versions of the database. We've had several customers, especially those that use MySQL, find that the different cloud offerings don't support the exact same features or even SQL language nuances as their on-premises counterparts. Well, what we found was that the different flavors, Oracle MySQL on-premises versus Amazon Aurora MySQL, they didn't work the same way for some features or the features weren't available. You need to make sure that you align the features between on-premises and cloud implementations if you're going to utilize the cloud to separate your test and production environments. Microsoft SQL Server on Amazon RDS. It's a DBPaaS offering. When you compare it to SQL Server on-premises, the Amazon RDS version doesn't support Polybase, Stretch Database, backing up to blob storage, importing data into the MSDB database. You can't rename a database if it's used in an Amazon mirroring deployment, and it doesn't allow you to increase storage on a SQL Server database. If you need to increase storage, you back your databases up, create a new DB instance with increased storage, and then restore the databases into the new DB instance. It doesn't support SSIS, AS, or RS. It doesn't have SQL Server level security roles for sysadmin, server admin, security admin, DB creator, and bulk admin. It also doesn't support database mail, maintenance plans, distributed queries, log shipping, change data capture, SQL Server audit, or bulk insert. Well, let's compare two more products. How about the Azure SQL database versus SQL Server on-premises? Two database products offered by the same vendor. SQL Server in the cloud versus SQL Server on-premises. Microsoft Azure DBPaaS offering doesn't support attaching to a database, backup and restore statements, change data capture, database mail, database mirroring, database snapshots, extended stored procedures, file stream, link servers, log shipping, resource governor, the profiler, SSIS, AS, or RS. Now, instead of database mirroring and log shipping, it does provide active geodata replication, which can be a better alternative for many customers. It's just different. I'm not stating that these environments aren't as effective as on-premises. They just have different features, and we all need to be aware of those differences. Now we know that feature mismatch, it's a pretty big deal for consumers. We also know that for the foreseeable future, that cloud and on-premises systems will coexist with each other. The two heavyweight contenders, Oracle and Microsoft, both understand how important it is for customers, especially those that have a lot of on-premises systems, to be able to make a seamless transition to cloud architectures. Both vendor strategies are hybrid clouds, which has the goal of providing 100% seamless administration for DBAs and 100% code transportability for developers. Their strategy is to allow administrators to use the same tools on both systems and to provide an exact feature match between cloud and on-premises environments. Oracle describes it as a single pane of glass. Microsoft has the same strategy, but neither vendor is totally there. My personal opinion is that the winner of the cloud versus on-premises database war, it's not going to be on-premises or the cloud. It's going to be this hybrid solution, which provides organizations with the option of seamlessly choosing between cloud and on-premises implementations. Customers who want a total cloud solution have the option of adding Amazon as an alternative, but they will be locked into a total cloud-based solution, which is a bad alternative if that's their intended strategy. I just read an article this morning that Amazon is possibly entering into a relationship with a vendor to build out a system that will allow them to penetrate into on-premises architectures. So it looks like that Amazon may be wanting, one of their strategies is to compete head-to-head with both Oracle and Microsoft in those hybrid architectures. It should be pretty interesting if that relationship comes to fruition and Amazon does begin to offer another hybrid alternative where they will provide you with a solution that allows you to seamlessly transfer your database systems between cloud and on-premises. We'll see what happens. Amazon does have the most complete cloud solution, but right now it doesn't have an on-premises alternative, but that may change. Its competitive strengths will be the breadth and depth of database products it offers, the price point, and the quality, increasing robustness, and ease of use of its cloud architectures. Amazon customers will have the continued ability to choose from really a wide array of database products and custom tailor a cloud architecture that meets their shop's needs. Microsoft Azure, as well as Oracle, they're going to allow customers to build their entire application stack on the cloud also, right? Oracle and Microsoft's hybrid environments will become the architecture of choice for customers who are committed to Oracle's and Microsoft's product offerings. They'll also become attractive alternatives for shops that prefer the freedom to choose between cloud and on-premises database environments. Depending on the vendor, the architecture configuration, and DB product chosen, you may find that you'll be tailoring your database configuration, tools, utilities, interfaces, SQL statements, procedural languages to work in that vendor's environment. Well, we all know that the more you tailor your tech stack configuration to any vendor, the more locked in you're going to become. During your initial evaluation, you will need to determine how much customization you're going to need to do by performing the proper due diligence, and also determining how important it is to your shop to have the freedom to swap vendors. What we need to remember is that no database is an island. They take feeds from flat files and other database applications, and they produce output that is ingested by other applications and end users. Getting a lot of data into and out of a cloud DB system can be challenging, especially if there are tight time constraints and large data volumes need to be transferred. According to two unnamed industry-leading advisory firms, because I'm not allowed to, the two top reasons that shops are concerned about moving to the cloud, we discuss security, but the second one is loss of control over their environment. Most managers feel secure knowing that their shop is in total control of the environments that tasked with supporting. When you move to the cloud, you're going to share the responsibility with a third-party vendor. That loss of ownership is a big sticking point for many organizations, and that's perfectly understandable. And this sharing of responsibilities will impact your organization, especially when an issue occurs. You'll need to go to management and explain to them that their IT department, meaning you and everyone you work with, is no longer totally in control of the availability, performance, and recoverability of their critical computing environments. Some shops may view this as a benefit. Others will view it as a risk. Most will view it as a combination of risk and reward. Let's spend just a couple of minutes on the creation of a cloud architecture strategy. What's your experience level? If your shop is just starting out, you may want to test the waters using infrastructure as a service and then move into DBPaaS. IaaS is much more closer to on-premises in terms of support and product compatibility. If you prefer to rent your OS and DB software, DBPaaS is a much better choice. You just need to remember that you're not going to own any software when that relationship with the vendor is over. How many changes are you comfortable making to your application software and database? How about your internal procedures, processes, change management, security? You'll need to allocate human capital, create project plans, and allocate funding to these conversions. The impact of those changes will be much higher on DBPaaS than if you chose IaaS. Do you want to reduce your human labor cost to support the OS? Well, we learned in the previous slide that DBPaaS doesn't reduce the amount of DBA support hours that dramatically. So most of the human labor savings will be attributed to the OS, and of course the support environment and the hardware. You'll need to investigate your shop's software products that interact with your database systems, monitoring security, application development. If you're going to use DBPaaS, you'll need to verify that they can continue to work in the cloud, or you'll need to find viable replacements. The same thing goes for your in-house and COTS application. We learned that not all the features that are available in on-premises databases are provided by their DBPaaS counterparts. You're going to need to identify the features not available, distribute them to your vendors and internal developers, maybe to find out if your applications will work with that DBPaaS system. If you have an application that relies heavily on a particular feature to provide critical application functionality, well, that database or databases could be moved to an IaaS architecture, remain on premises, or be changed. Are your systems heavily audited? IaaS provides much greater visibility and ease of access to the system than DBPaaS. Here's RDX's recommendations for those customers considering when you're implementing cloud database solutions. Your strategy could be, we want to test the waters. Well, that's what we recommend. Try the cloud on a few selected applications, but you need to choose the right ones. Thoroughly understand the architectures and select the vendor offering that best meets your needs. Then realize that they're going to be supported differently than on-premises counterparts, and be prepared to pay for that. This is not an architecture that should be entered into without much analysis and forethought. There's vendors like us, we're all here to help you when you're ready. If you take the time to perform the required due diligence and be willing to absorb the costs associated with the upfront analysis, and that's critical. You need to perform the upfront analysis before diving right in. If you do that, you'll be able to select the appropriate architecture that meets your shop's needs. If you don't, you're going to end up spending much more time and ongoing support than you hoped for. The cloud, in some cases, may not save you money when compared to on-premises, but it does provide you with the increased agility, the ability to scale, and leverage the inherent benefits that the cloud architectures provide. Now, RDX doesn't profess to be an expert in all things cloud. We're still learning. The benefit we provide is we have a large customer base, and many of our clients use cloud database systems. We are, above all, a learning organization, and our collective egos doesn't prevent us from stating that we teach, but we also learn from our customers. We have customers that range from bleeding edge, latest technology, to those that have the strategy of yesterday's technology tomorrow. That range of strategy allows us to learn many different ways of doing things, how not to do things, and the pros and cons of many different architectures and tech stack combinations. This wraps up today's presentation. I highly recommend September's presentation. We're going to be discussing PCI DSS, that security framework, and how you can use it as a foundation for your security architecture. And you don't have to store or process credit cards. You can also send me an email. It's here at cfoot@rdx.com to send me a link. You can join our newsletter. You can become my LinkedIn buddy. Remember, this month's newsletter includes a link to an RDX video presentation on the rising interest in open source DBMS products, an extensive series of articles on Microsoft Azure analysis services, and a really good set of articles that compares cloud provider features and pricing, as well as an article that compares NoSQL to relational database products. So Kelly, do we have any questions?
Yes, Chris, we did have a few come in during the webinar. I'll start with this one. What is the single greatest mistake shops make when migrating apps to the cloud?
Well, actually there's a few. One, not having a well thought out strategy on how are you going to use the cloud. The steps you'll take to select and migrate applications, and how you're going to administer them once they're up there. All phases of the cloud migration lifecycle need to be analyzed, and strategies need to be created. Number two, underestimating the amount of interaction the selected DB-driven application has with other systems. A common DBA and developer practice is to leverage internal DB links. They allow a single SQL statement to access data directly from another database from within the source database. and the target DB being accessed by the DB link, they don't migrate it to the cloud. They expect that DB to communicate with that on-premises database. You may not get the performance that you're looking for, or the volume of data being transferred into and out of the cloud environment is much higher than they expected. I showed a slide, it stated no database is an island. There are very few environments that are actually standalone. That includes data being ingested by cloud databases and the data they generate and they send to other systems and users. Third, not evaluating the features utilized by the database being migrated. It's really important to identify all the features that database uses before you put it up in the cloud. That cloud environment may not have all the features that its on-premises counterpart does. Lastly, you need to understand that you're going to be renting the architecture, especially for DBPaaS offerings. That rental fee is based on utilization. It's not a set charge. Shops often underestimate the resources their databases will consume. Then they get sticker shock when they get that first monthly charge comes in. Any other questions?
Yes, the next one is, what recommendation would you make to shops considering cloud architectures?
I'd leverage the skills of techs that have been there and done that. Hire some consultants that have a well-documented background in cloud architectures to provide you with advice, or go with a service provider like RDX or a competitor. It'll help you migrate and then be there once, with you to support it once it's up there. Because our model is based on ongoing support, we're going to make sure you choose the correct architecture and perform the proper steps to migrate it. Because we're going to be there to support it after it's migrated. It's in everyone's best interest that we work with you to create a kind of a well-thought-out strategy migration plan. This isn't a sales pitch, it's just my advice. Don't go it alone, as mistakes are costly. And cloud migrations have high visibility, mainly because it's the hot architecture right now. So, obtain advice from consultants or service providers like RDX. That's certainly a good way to kind of jumpstart your cloud strategies. Anything else?
Yes, we have one more question. What does the future hold for cloud architectures?
Right now, I feel that the architecture that's the most beneficial is hybrid. And we know that we just learned that allows a seamless administration between cloud and on-premises systems. Shops have a huge cash outlay in on-premises environments. They're not going to be migrating everything to the cloud at a wholesale level. We're going to be administering both on-premises and cloud architectures for some time. Administering them the same way is key. Seamlessly transferring databases from one cloud architecture to another or between on-premises and cloud is going to become a critical feature. I think we're going to see further advancements in containers or container-like constructs, which allows you to easily pick up an environment when you need to. My top concern for the future is vendor lock-in. It's much harder to extract yourself from an architecture than it is a product. We all know that migrating, RDX is a database shop, that migrating from one database product to another, that's a pretty challenging project to undertake. Migrating between different compute, storage, app, and DB architectures, that's a much more challenging process. Everything changes, not only the technologies, but all of your support procedures, because they're different architectures. You use different commands, different processes. They're designed differently. They act differently. Well, I appreciate everyone attending today's presentation. As I said when I started, we'll be uploading a copy of the presentation to YouTube, and we'll also be uploading copies of the slides to SlideShare, and we'll make sure that you receive a link. And I certainly appreciate everyone attending today's presentation, and thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks again.